Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a review of a Hanwei Naginata. So I do need to know before we begin some biases, things like that are important for you to hear before you hear my opinions on the sword. So first note that this sword was sent to me by sword friend Corey for the purposes of review. Now, he went out and purchased it on Cult of Athena brand new. Cult of Athena sent it to me, and so it should be representative of what you would buy if you were to buy a brand new one from an authorized distributor. Now that said, I'm going to send this blade back off to Corey when I'm done with it, so know that that's kind of what's going on. I'm not affiliated with CAS Iberia or Hanwei. Yeah, nobody's paying me to do it. Somebody did ask me, sword friend Corey did, wanted me to do a review, but otherwise no company affiliation, nobody's giving me money to do the reviews and all that kind of stuff for what it's worth. But also know, I do really like Hanwei and CAS Iberia. I've had good products from them in the past, and in general, I have some pretty positive vibes towards their stuff. So I don't know that I'd necessarily be a fanboy, but yeah, I like their stuff. Now I'm going to do something I suck at, but it's important for the sake of reference as it relates to Naginata. There's a little bit of interesting stuff as it relates to Nagis historically, and I thought I would try and share some of it with you. Now, the Naginata is basically a halberd type weapon. It's a polearm. It's a spear-ish type weapon. It's a long sword at the end of a stick. So now this type of weapon has existed in a lot of different cultures and a lot of different form factors, but the idea of a sharp pointy object at the end of a stick is not terribly uncommon. Now you get the idea with a Naginata that you're able to do these large kind of sweeping arced attacks like you would with a sword, but they don't actually cut that well that way, as you'll probably see later in this video. Generally speaking, they do a little bit better with push cutting. You're actually able to get some penetration with the tip here, and they're good for range, because they're a polearm and that's what they do. Now, the shape of a Naginata is pretty common. This is I think a very good stereotypical look of a Naginata. It's got a big kind of swelled tip over here, and the curvature is deepest, the curvature is deepest kind of near the tip of the weapon, though supposedly the curvature could be reversed and you could have the sharpened edge be on this side where it pitches forward, though I haven't really seen Naginata that look like that. Anyway, this shape seems pretty common, though the shape did vary over time. There's some that might be quite a bit shorter than this, and there's some that might be quite a bit longer. Sometimes they're a little straighter, sometimes they're curved a little bit more, but in general, they tend to have this kind of shape. And they also tend to have this type of bohea on it, where you've got this deep groove kind of going about a third of the way, and then the spine of the blade is thinned out or brought to a taper along the back to reduce the weight or something, supposedly. I'm not exactly sure what it does, but this is kind of a standard Naginata style geometry. Where the Naginata came from or where it first appeared is really hard to say. As I noted earlier, there's lots of cultures with a sharp stick, a sharp pointy sword looking thing at the end of a stick that exist in a lot of different form factors in different cultures all around the world. So where this one came from is tough to say. Some people think it kind of came from China or happened through some immigration processes as people came to Japan from China and brought the idea along with them. Some thought it evolved from farming implements or evolved as a weapon on its own. I'm not really 100% sure there. What I can say is that it was commonly used on the battlefield as an anti-cavalry weapon, where you could whack the feet out of horses or poke somebody who's up on a mounted horse and get them down. But they started to go away from the battlefield as battlefield weapons when firearms became more popular. Now, when exactly that happened again, I don't really know. I see some information that say firearms became something common as early as the 15th century, and some people say it happened late in the 17th century, and I don't really know. I'm not a great student of history, but suffice to say, the Naginata fell out of favor when firearms started to become prevalent in the battlefield. And it's not exactly like they were the mainstay weapon either. I mean, people forget that, archers and whatnot really did a lot of the work, or yari or spears. So anyway, but nevertheless, it was a popular weapon for a time on the battlefield, and later it became less popular on the battlefield, but still remained popular as kind of like the home defense weapon. I suppose I think of it maybe, a lot of people like to have a shotgun as their home defense weapon here, and the Naginata is kind of the shotgun of the time, I guess, where a lot of women would use it to defend the home. And as odd as it might seem, when I read up, a lot of people say that this was very popular among the female samurai or female warriors, and used by women as home defense weapons, and that it was very popular among women. It's funny when I hear that, because as I study a little bit of how to use a naginata, I find that it's how to move this weapon becomes very connected to your hips, and my brain isn't connected to my hips at all. So I find the naginata a little bit cumbersome to use, a little bit awkward, and the people that seem to take to it very naturally, or at least the ones that have in my personal martial arts experience, tend to be women. They seem to gravitate towards this, and it tends to become an extension of them a little bit quicker than it does for the male counterparts. Now, I don't know why that is, if women are more connected to their hips by nature, but I certainly am not, and I think that's one of the points that causes me to struggle with the naginata as a martial artist. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The point is that it became very popular for female practitioners of martial arts, female warriors, and females that used this as a home defense weapon. It was also, naginata are cool looking weapons, and they could be used as decorations, and they were expensive, so fancy people had them. Kind of a status symbol from what I'm able to find. Now, in terms of what happens with naginata today, I don't really know. I know there are some martial arts that still study naginata. I do, but it's certainly not the most popular weapon. You have to have high ceilings as well to study with it, and it's just not a very common type of weapon to study with. But it still is popular. It still exists, though it's much less popular than swords are, for example. And later on, you'll see a little bit of comparison to other things in the market, but I think the main point to say is that really there isn't a very big market of available products for naginata. So, it's not terribly popular anyway. At least people don't make them, so I guess people aren't clamoring to buy them. You can buy this Hanwei Naginata on Cult of Athena for $567.95. The MSRP on Hanwei's website, if you like spending more money, is $860. But most of the time you can find them for about $560. They come up for sale from time to time on eBay and whatnot. They're usually a little bit more expensive than the typical sword discount would be. But they tend to go for like $400 or $500 on eBay depending on condition. Now, one thing that I find a little bit odd is that this is listed as hand-forged 1090 or 1065 high-carbon steel and tempered, yet down here it lists T10. Now, I don't know if 1065 is the same as T10, but I thought that was a little strange on Hanwei's website. Now, also note that some of the differences here, I have it measured at 76 inches overall rather than 76 3/4. The blade I have at 20 inches rather than 20 1/4. Handle length is 55 inches rather than 55 1/2. And the weight is really the most surprising thing. Now, the blade and shaft together weigh 3 pounds, 15 ounces. And the saya, I'm guessing, is what they were measuring with this 4 pounds, 10 ounces here, but that's only a half a pound. So it's still actually several ounces less, even if I weigh it with the saya, which you typically wouldn't. So it comes in quite a bit less. Thickness at the guard is 0.305 is what's measured here. I got 0.279, so it's a little bit thinner. I'm really having trouble understanding where this measurement came from. This is, almost a full pound or pretty close to a pound heavier than what it actually is. And if a size is included, which still doesn't, I don't know where all that weight went. If they used a different wood when they measured it, or what changed to make that happen, or if it's just a typo, which is certainly possible. It could just be a typo. So let's go over the pieces for this Hanwei Naginata here. Now we'll start at that's not good. Start at the base here. There's probably a technical name for this piece, but this little butt cap on here is nice enough. It seems like you could actually hang the naginata or place it on a little nail hook or something here if you wanted to display it. But it stayed on pretty well. I waxed some pumpkins with it, and it held up pretty well. It didn't move around or jostle. Though, admittedly, it does look like it's on there. Just, I don't know if it's me, but it looks like it's on there just a little bit crooked. I think it might just be me, but it looks like it's not quite twisted just even. Anyway, it's off just a little bit, nothing really substantial there, and we'll move on to the shaft. Now, the shaft is a black Ishime shaft, and one thing that I thought was kind of strange is that this is a deep black, and then there's this ever so slight color change right at this part of the blade, right here. This part of the shaft is like a deep brown, and it requires a lot of sunlight for you to really see it. I don't know what the difference is, but it seems like there's just a marginally different color here. Now, what you might notice as well is that this little piece here, this little adornment, looks like it was glued on, and then it's come loose. It came loose during testing, and it slides around the Naginata. As we move up here, this is something that I think is an addition to the Naginata that happened maybe recently, where it basically holds in the little makugi, the wooden peg that keeps the Naginata secured. And it's a nice addition, frankly. It keeps the peg in. But one thing I'm noticing is that there's these little plastic caps in here that can come out. I don't know if you can actually see that, but these little plastic bits can come in and out of here, and they get hammered back in, and they keep the makugi. Well, I see where it went, but you see what I mean. It just flew over there. This is something that, in context or in theory, I like the idea of, to keep your makugi solid. It also, was going to hopefully keep the shaft together, these parts, if it starts breaking, right? So if I really swing this nagi into something, these metal caps are supposed to be keeping everything together. If the wood splits or something like that, rather than have the Naginata fly out. But you can see I'm not super assured by these pieces and how effective they are. I mean, little bits of them are flying all over the place or falling off. So the shaft now didn't break, and you can see here on the shaft here, the opening, it didn't break. And the little cap up here wasn't even glued or anything like that. It was just placed on and held on by the rest of the blade components here. But there we go, there's the shaft. Now, one thing I also noticed about the shaft that I wasn't too keen on, and that is that it's short. The Naginata that I train with, the Bokin Naginata, I don't know if it's a Bokin because it's a Naginata, but you get the idea. The wooden Naginata that I train with is substantially longer, and that really kind of throws things off. This feels like a much smaller Naginata, and it's kind of weird to work with. It's just short, and so I'm guessing that's done for shipping reasons, because if you ship a really long pole, it's tough to deal with. But I think that might be another thing that's a little odd, is that this seems a bit short for a Naginata. I'm sitting down and the pole is kind of right at my head, and typically the Naginata, I have trouble reaching the top of the Naginata that I train with. So anyway, if we move on, now this is the first pole arm from Hanwei that I've received in the mail that didn't have a cracked saya. I've had Naginata before, the saya was cracked. I've had Yari, the saya were cracked, and every pole arm from Hanwei I've had, the saya has not survived shipping, and this one did. It's the same kind of black ishime. It fits pretty well. It's got a nice kind of koiguchi there. It's a little bit on the big side, but it needs to be to accommodate this kind of sizable piece. And it fits on, and what you'll notice is that this is the seppa, but it doesn't rattle inside there, so it's actually pretty well fit saya. As I move on to the other components here, we've got some seppa on here and a suba. The suba is pretty nice. I mean, it's a very simple kind of ring suba, if you will. It's got some little bedazzlements on there. I think Hanwei does a pretty good job with their fittings overall. Like you can see, it's not just a simple casting. Some of these mon wrap around the edge. There's little details here which are small and kind of practical, but I think it looks pretty good overall. The blade itself, the Nakago, is not terribly long. I mean, it's long enough, but you might expect a Naginata Nakago to be a bit longer than this. So it's a bit on the short side, but there is actually some, like a nice signature along here, and I like that, there's actually still some file marks. They don't have to do this. That doesn't really seem like much. It's not certainly perfect, but it is something, and I think they do a pretty good job on the Nakago for a mass production company. Hanwei generally tends to have one of the prettier Nakagos for mass production stuff. Now it's not perfect, it's not the best, but it's better than a lot of the other options out there. The Hibachi is a simple brass Hibachi that looks and feels pretty much like any other katana Hibachi for a Hanwei katana. It fits on and it sits right there. It kind of rests in and seats pretty well and even. I'm also noticing that the ha-manchi and mu-manchi in here are actually parallel, but they're not quite even, not quite flat. They have these little ledges that don't quite look perfect, but they're covered up by the Hibachi, and I don't know that anyone really notices. The other thing you'll notice is that this blade is straight. Later in the cutting, you'll see me not intentionally abused the blade, but I did put it under some strain, and for a moment it was bent. But it's come back out, and it seems very, very straight now. I'm not noticing any kind of bends or twists at all in the blade. The planes on the blade are pretty good for a Hanwei blade. There's still, little ripples and things like that, and it's not perfect, but it's one of the better pieces that I've seen from Hanwei. Sharpness-wise, it's a reasonably sharp blade. You all know how good I am at cutting paper, so this should illustrate that it's a reasonably sharp blade. Polish-wise, it's kind of satin finished. It's not really all that great, really. I mean, it's okay. It's tough to see in some lights, and it has this kind of generic pattern on it, but it's still decent looking. I like that there's a contrast between the bohea here and then the bohea with this little lacquered Sanskrit looking thing on the side here. It's a pretty handsome weapon overall. I really like it, and it's sizable. I think it's one of the better looking naginata that's out there that you can buy now. And let me talk about that for just a moment, because I did a little bit of looking and I wasn't really able to find a lot of naginata for sale. Now, there's one on Sword and Armory that has some similar looks to this, but it's not quite the same. It's also $89, so it's not fair for me to compare a $100 naginata to a $500 naginata. And there's some other pieces out there from like Amazon, or some wall hanger stuff, or some fantasy inspired naginata, but all of them are on the less expensive side and not necessarily either not meant to be functional or much less expensive than this. And I can't really find a naginata that costs as much money as this. This is the most expensive naginata on the market, and I don't know that anything else is out there that you can buy to really compare to. Now, I could be wrong on that. That's me looking around, and I'll include the links to the other things I was able to find. But if you have an idea of where you can buy a naginata today, throw it in the description down below. It seems like if you want something large or something on the nicer side, you're limited to the Hanwei piece like this, or buying an antique off of eBay. So, how does it handle? How does it feel? How does it move around? Well, I did a little calculation on the Sword Dynamics computer, and I'm going to go over to it right now. Now, what you're able to see here is some of the information in the Weapon Dynamics computer. And where I have a little difficulty is, and I'm probably doing it wrong, is where the lever reference is supposed to be. So the lever reference that I have noted is somewhere up in here, and that's pretty much where I would place my first hand when holding the naginata. But maybe I'm supposed to put it towards the bottom, and if I put it towards the bottom, it changes the dynamics of the naginata really substantially on this agility graph here. Now, most of the points stay the same, but I'm not sure exactly where that lever reference is supposed to be. I put it where the lever would be, I guess, and that's my hand applying pressure in my first hand, but you hold this weapon with two hands. So anyway, I'm not 100% sure on this one. I did get the rest of the measurements in there correctly, and I was also kind of surprised to find that the center of percussion, or rather the node in the blade, was really, really close to the base. I kind of expected it to be in this cutting plane up here, and it's not. Now, balance-wise, as I hold the naginata and in one of these spots down here, the balance moves around in such a way that it's kind of in this monouchi, or the cutting plane of the blade. But the center of percussion, where the node is very far down, and I found that to be on the strange side. It could just be assembly or how long the handle is. Maybe that's common. I haven't ever really tested that before, but I thought that was something that was interesting, and I don't quite know what to make of that exactly. Now, what I can say in terms of moving it around and handling it in general is that it feels fine, but what stands out as obvious is that it's short, and it's very bouncy. It wiggles around in my hand and doesn't feel terribly sturdy. The shaft has a lot of flex to it, and that's not necessarily uncommon with a polearm, but I found it bounces around quite a bit more than my Boken does. And that could be the wood that they're using or how thin it is. I'm not 100% sure. Then what I was able to tell you is that the shortness made it kind of easy to move around. It's pretty quick and nimble for what it is. But cutting-wise is actually pretty difficult. Now, I don't cut very often with a naginata. I do study a bit of naginata as part of the martial arts that I study, but I'm not very good at cutting with it. It's not something I practice or do very often, so I found it a little cumbersome. Now, you can take some kind of sweeping strikes with it, and I did that, but I didn't have a whole lot of success in cutting with the naginata. It wasn't exactly the best at piercing either, and as I was kind of moving through and doing some of the basic cuts, I noticed that the blade flexed and bent kind of right near where the hibachi is. And it's fortunately straightened out, but I didn't have a whole lot of success in terms of cutting with the naginata. I didn't find it to be a very comfortable experience. What you're going to notice is me cutting through a few different water bottles, and you can see the blade flex in some of the slow-mo parts. It's more or less to show you how much this blade kind of flops around, even with a water bottle. Now, I know I'm a big guy, and I know I'm moving the blade kind of quickly, but I'm trying to be relatively reserved here. Granted, I'm failing at kind of finesse, but you can still see that the blade has, basically it's vibrating a lot, or a lot of that force is just transferring in my arm. It's very kind of floppy. Anyway, I'm moving on through water bottles. I'm doing some stabs. I'm not having a whole lot of luck moving through them, frankly. It does cut them, but not exactly well. I move on to pool noodles. It moves through pool noodles, and it gives me a chance to try a few different types of cuts with an naginata. Pool noodles are kind of notoriously unforgiving of bad form. That's no exception here. Nevertheless, it worked okay. Now, the other important thing to note is that I am not any kind of proficient master with an naginata, and I am definitely admitting to underusing this tool. A lot of the cutting issues that you're seeing are because of me as a practitioner. I do study a bit of how to move an naginata, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert or really proficient at all at cutting with it. So hopefully that provides you with a little bit of context to how it does. But again, while I said I study it, I don't want to give you the impression that I'm good with it, which should be obvious after having seen me move it around. With tatami, you'll notice that it does cut through tatami, but it kind of makes a big mess of things. And in some cuts, it is cutting through the tatami and some of the general kind of case of downward diagonal strikes. But I definitely feel the resistance. And again, I'm a big guy. I'm moving it at a reasonably brisk pace, and it shouldn't be that much work to cut through tatami. Cutting through tatami is not a big challenge. Cutting through it well with good, clean angles is really more of the challenge. And you can also see that the blade, when I strike the tatami the wrong way, has a lot of flex and it bends. Now, I'm able to bend it back pretty easily, but nevertheless, it still does bend. Now, just as a point of reference, I do move on to cut some fruit and some other things, or not fruit, but veggies later, and it works okay and whatever, but the point is I'm going to show you this is me cutting with a different sword on the same tatami on the same day as a point of reference. I know it's a different weapon, but it gives you at least a point of reference when you see me having trouble with tatami, to see how I move with a different blade on the same day, cutting the same medium. Now I've reflected some on using the naginata between the time I used it, while I have it basically, and my opinion of it isn't exactly fantastic. And I have to point out that the way I move this naginata isn't going to be the same as everyone else. Now, again, I mentioned I studied a little bit of naginata, but I do it in one particular type of school, and naginata isn't something that I've really ever put a ton of interest in. It's not been the focus of my study. Admittedly, I find swords more interesting, and I'm more passionate about that aspect of the martial art. But naginata is definitely something that I do study, and I noticed that I'm holding the naginata in the middle. So I'm kind of balancing the naginata into thirds, and that's generally how I move it in the school. So what that means is that I usually have a good amount of length on either end. I'm not kind of choking up towards the end of the naginata and really taking advantage of the reach of the pole arm. And now you could, but in most of the techniques that I've learned at this point, there really isn't anything like that. Additionally, the naginata, the way I use it is push cutting, not cleaving strikes, and a lot of it doesn't really attack the shins very much, and it doesn't really seem that I use the naginata the same way I see other people using the naginata. As a case in point, take a look at this little excerpt from a video. Now, you don't have to look too far. You can Google naginata or type it into YouTube, and you'll probably find a few different videos where there's some type of kendo or some sparring videos of Naginata that are really similar to Kendo. And the point is that they use the Naginata quite a bit differently than I've been trained to use the Naginata, and I wasn't aware of it until I started researching it for this particular YouTube video. So I tend to hold it in the middle, and it gives me some control over both ends of the Naginata, but it makes me lose reach. And on top of that, I don't have the same kind of really kind of cleaving or popping power, if you will, that you would get by using it like a more spear type object. And when I see some of the kendo or the sparring that happens with the Naginata, a lot of it is quick strikes to the shins, and supposedly shin guards became more popular because of the Naginata, though that's again one of those little historical quips that I don't know, the validity of or not. Nevertheless, the way practitioners seem to use it in sparring is quite a bit different than the way I use it. They tend to hold it towards the bottom third of the Naginata, and I don't. I'm more towards the middle. And the techniques that I use and know how to do, well, that I'm working on, I should say, don't seem to move in the same fashion, and the target is just a little different. So I do have to frame in that I didn't have the best experience using this Naginata, but then again, I studied a very old style of martial art, and perhaps it functions better in more capable hands or somebody that does a different style. So that brings me to the final point. Do I actually think it's worth it or not? And the answer probably isn't going to surprise you at no, but it might surprise you a little bit at yes, and I'm somewhere between those two. So here's the odd thing. There's just not a lot of Naginata out there. If I look at this from a logical perspective and I compare it to the same type of criteria I would judge it on if it were a different blade, like a katana, which I've talked about a few times. Would it be okay if the kashira fell off while you were using it?
That's not
would that be okay, but the ska didn't crack? No, that wouldn't be. Would it be okay if it took a big old bend during the testing? Probably not so much. I mean, if it's obviously my fault, which this one probably is, especially looking at the video, it's pretty much my fault. That said, no, I mean, that's not great. Would it be okay if, when you're putting the Mikugi in, little bits of bobs pop out? No, it wouldn't be okay. So those types of things happen during this. Those rings on the shaft don't hold on really well, and they could be reinforced. You could find a way to put them on, but it's not that great. I didn't hit anything really hard, and the shaft also has a lot of flex to it and a lot of vibration that transfers into my hands. I don't know if a new shaft could be made easily enough, but that's, again, an extra cost. And the blade stayed reasonably sharp, but it bent around a little bit, and I didn't find it overly easy to cut with. And as I examined the dynamics, I don't exactly have a whole lot of information or statistics to say what a polearm should feel like, but this one doesn't seem to have it. Well, it doesn't feel great, I guess I would say. And that can depend a lot on where you hold it, but suffice to say, it's a little short and a little awkward feeling. So all those things considered really kind of steer towards the no category. Unfortunately, if you want a Naginata, there just aren't a lot of options. And the options that you have are in a lesser price category. If they're there, they're either fantasy, decoration, or much less expensive. Now, it remains to be seen if some of those less expensive alternatives are comparable to this one, and that I don't necessarily have an answer for. If you have one, throw something in the commentary below. Now, that said, I wasn't able to find anything else around the $500 or $600 range for a Naginata. You do have some options. If you have a budget, you could, option A, have a custom one made. You can work with the smith and have a Naginata made for you, but expect a bill of a couple $1,000s. Good side, you get to pick what you want on it. Downside is there's going to be some cost associated with it. Though you could really go to town, and the cost is as high as you want, but I'd expect it to be at least a couple $1,000s, and that would be on the low good guy deal side. Then you have something along the lines of refitting an antique. They come up for sale on eBay or through various vendors every now and again, and you could again buy an antique and have it refitted. But would it be really durable for cutting? I don't know. Would it be functional for practice in terms of doing the motions, kata, that type of thing? Yeah, I mean, it'd be okay. But again, it's probably not going to cut really well. And again, the cost is likely going to be substantial since you're probably going to have it all fitted out and made to work on a pole and all that kind of stuff. Those are really about the only options that I can see, shy of looking for this one secondhand on eBay. What I was able to find, and in my experience when I sold the one I had previously, they usually sell for about $400-ish, give or take. Sometimes they're a better deal if they're in worse condition, though I don't know if that's necessarily a better deal. Anyway, ballpark $300 to $400 used, $560 new. And given that there's really no other options, if you're looking for a finished naginata with decent fittings and you're trying to go through some of the motions of kata or that type of thing, I don't necessarily think it's bad. I think it falters a little bit in cutting, and as soon as you really put it to use, the deficiencies really become apparent because the parts start coming and moving around. I don't think that's good. You wouldn't want that on the battlefield, right? So from that side of things, no, but given the lack of options, it seems like an acceptable option. I don't think it's great, and I think if a lot more people move into making naginatas, it's quickly going to be overtaken if it doesn't evolve. Now, that said, there are some things I should note. The naginata that Paul Chen makes has, or CAS Iberia in this case, has evolved slightly. The original version I had didn't have the little ring around where the Mikugi went, and in some of the polearm type weapons I've used from Hanwei, the Mikugi isn't secured and it falls out under use or duress. It happened with the Yari, even though the shaft on the Yari also broke. But in this one, that little ring is there on the newer version, and I think that's actually kind of cool that at least there are some changes happening over time. But I still think that quite a bit more has to change. You could take this particular iteration and secure it. You could put a more durable adhesive on the parts. You could somehow secure them to the shaft. You could put a new shaft on. I don't personally think you should have to spend $500-ish on something that's supposed to be functional and then reinforce it so it actually is. But unfortunately, I guess that's the position we're in. So anyway, my thoughts are no for the most part, but kind of yes, given that there are not a lot of great options out there. So that's what I have for you. Bummer as it may be. If you have any feedback or new naginatas come to the market or I missed something, please post it in the commentary below. I'd really appreciate it, and as always, I hope it's been interesting. Cheers, and thanks for watching. Flexible or bouncy, I don't know what the right word is, so I should think about it.